Hello and welcome to IR Thinker, where international affairs are discussed. I'm Martin Zupko. Today I'm interested in a very interesting topic about Mediterranean gas, Eastern Mediterranean gas industry. And there are interesting countries like Egypt, Jordan, Cyprus, Lebanon, Israel, and others. And today my expert is Alexander Kislov. Alexander, hello.
Hello, Martin. Thanks for having me here.
Alexander is a professional natural gas analyst and market researcher. He is publishing in Jerusalem Post and writing many reports. And for those of you, especially my students who would like to get some information, just go to Alexander LinkedIn, and there are many links to interesting reports and information that are fantastically useful, especially when you research this interesting topic. So, Alexander, let's start with the first question, with the first overview. And I would like to know why the Eastern Mediterranean gas industry is important. And if you can tell us something about each individual countries like Egypt, Jordan, Cyprus, Turkey, Lebanon, Israel. So we have some overview, like what's going on and why my students and international audience should further research this area of energy and geopolitics.
Thank you, Martin, for this introduction. First of all, let's define what do we mean when we speak about the East Mediterranean region, or East Med, how we simply put it. By saying so, when we speak about natural gas, we mainly mean countries as Egypt, Israel, Cyprus, also Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. And all these countries have a very different situations in terms of natural gas markets. And maybe in order to start, I will just give a brief overview of this country's natural gas markets. And then maybe throughout our interview, we could take a deeper cut inside each of these markets. So Egypt is by far the largest natural gas producer in the region. In year 2022, Egypt produced about 67 BCM of natural gas. But Egypt is a country with a population of over 100 million of people, consumes the bulk of gas it produces locally. And natural gas plays a vital role in Egypt's economy, and it is the primary source of power generation in the country. However, there is a thin delta between Egypt's natural gas production and local consumption, a thin surplus. And besides that surplus, Egypt, since 2020, has been importing natural gas from Israel via pipelines. And this surplus of production, combined with Israeli supply, allows Egypt to export some gas in form of LNG, as Egypt has two operational LNG plants. One is called Yeta, the other is called Itku. And Egypt is one of the key players in the LNG sector in this region. So it is located very close to Europe, which is one of the key sources of demand for LNG these days. And in year 2022, Egypt played its role in supplying new LNG volumes to Europe. We will talk about this later. Now, let's move to Israel, as I've mentioned it. Israel is a growing natural gas producer, and in year 2022, country produced around 22 BCMs of natural gas. But contrary to Egypt, Israel doesn't consume nearly all of gas it produces locally. It exports significant volumes of gas, namely to Egypt and also to Jordan. And Israel, in the past, let's say, decades, has undergone what is called natural gas revolution, because 20 years ago, Israel was producing very marginal and small volumes of natural gas from its offshore field. And at some point, it was even importing gas from Egypt and even LNG, as it has an LNG import infrastructure that can import LNG through FSRU, floating storage and regasification unit. But thanks to giant and unique fields discovered offshore Israel, namely Tamar field and Leviathan, the situation has changed upside down, and now Egypt is a growing producer and growing exporter, both to Egypt and Jordan. And there's still a lot of gas lying under the seabed. There are reserves to be developed in the Leviathan field and in Tamar field, and that also will be topic of our today's discussion, how to develop these fields. Speaking about Jordan, Jordan is a rather small market with annual consumption of about 3 per year, mainly in the power sector. And Jordan also has an LNG import terminal, which allows us to import again LNG through the FSRU in Aqaba, which is on the Red Sea. Now let's move to the north, and Lebanon up to date doesn't consume any gas and doesn't produce any gas. However, there are some exploration drillings that are on the way offshore Lebanon. And now let's go to Cyprus. Cyprus is a country with up to date, again, no gas consumption and no gas production. But Cyprus has significant gas reserves. One of the most famous fields located offshore Cyprus is the Aphrodite field. And there are many international majors which have interest in offshore blocks in Cyprus, including Exxon, Eni, Total, and others. And so it is a potential gas producer. And besides that, about 4 years ago, Cyprus launched the project of building an LNG import terminal. It's also an FSRU solution. So actually, it's a retrofitted LNG carrier, which allows to import cargoes of LNG. And according to the latest news, Cyprus will launch this terminal in 2024. And the gas delivered through this terminal will be mostly consumed in the power sector at the Vasilikos power station in Cyprus. And the last but not the least of the countries I've mentioned when we were speaking about this East Med geographical area is Turkey. Turkey is also a very big consumer market. It consumed about 55 BCM of natural gas last year. And it's a very big natural gas importer because it nearly has no domestic production, and it's until now it has been completely dependent on imports, firstly from Russia, Azerbaijan, Iran, and also LNG. So here is the brief overview of the East Med countries, and you've also asked what does make this region so interesting from the political point of view and from the point of view of the developing economic ties. Well, the first thing you need to understand that these are ever-changing roles of these countries. So let's take Egypt and Israel. Egypt used to export natural gas to Israel. Now the situation has turned upside down, and Israel exports gas to Egypt. So it's an ever-changing market environment. That's the first point, which is very interesting about this region. The second point is that this region contains very significant reserves of natural gas that could be developed and monetized and supplied to a global market. But it's a more or less like a jigsaw puzzle, and to monetize them in the most effective way, there's a strong need for a comprehensive solution that will enable collaboration between these countries. For example, between Cyprus and Israel, between Israel and Egypt, as Egypt has LNG plants and Israel has reserves of gas. So there is a very strong need for collaboration, both on governmental and corporate levels. And it makes this region unique from this perspective. And the third point I would like to mention that we all know that this region had its ups and downs in terms of political relations between countries. And now, especially after the signing of the Abraham Accords, which we will touch upon during our interview today, there is a very strong push and impetus towards normalization of relations between these countries. And EastMed is becoming more or less a prosperous and politically stable natural gas province just now. So this process is happening now, and it's a very exciting process. And the interest of international majors to this region showcases how this region is important.
There is one follow-up question, Alexander. When you were speaking about all those countries, are we mostly speaking about the offshore gas, or we also have like countries which have like inland natural gas reserves? Just for the students to clarify, when you have those countries, sure. how to understand this?
Sure. First and foremost, these are offshore reserves. So Egypt has some onshore production, but again, the key source of gas are offshore fields like Zohr, giant Zohr field, and others. And in terms of Israel, it's the same story. So Leviathan and Tamar, and also new fields that were launched in 2022. I mean, the Karish field, they are all offshore fields. And Turkey is the same story. So Turkey, until now, it hasn't developed any significant gas reserves, but it has an offshore field, not in the Black Sea, which is called Sakarya, but it's also offshore field.
Right. That's good to clarify, because when you are a country inland, you managing everything within the borders, but when you have something on the sea, there is international water and high sea law and all those very interesting connotations, especially when we have China and all those superpowers competing for each millimeter of the ocean nowadays. So let's speak a little bit about the Abraham Accords, because you mentioned how crucial is the cooperation among the countries, or bilateral cooperation as well, to basically monetize or to utilize the gas reserves. Because sometimes you have a gas reserves in a disputed waters, and it takes 20 years to get sort of things sorted, and then you can extract the gas. So how is this cooperation among those countries? And is there any impact of the Abraham Accords, which was the initiative coming from Israel?
A great question, Martin. So when we say Abraham Accords, we collectively refer to a set of measures and steps which were taken towards the normalization and diplomatic developments in this region. And we refer collectively to the peace treaties which were signed between Israel and Abraham Accord member countries. And formally, the Abraham Accords notion was coined in 2020, around 3 years ago. So in August 2020, with a very big support from the United States, it all started, and Israel and UAE signed a peace agreement, and it was followed with agreements between Israel and Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, and other countries in the region. And the other point you need to understand about the Abraham Accord is that it is based on the foundation of the peace treaties, peace agreements, which were signed between Israel and Egypt and Jordan decades ago. So the peace regulation between Israel and Egypt and Jordan is not something new, but both Egypt and Jordan are considered to be legacy members of Abraham Accords. So this is a very broad political framework which enables the cooperation between countries on the governmental and corporate levels. And the signing of the accords and their development had a tremendous impact on the region, a tremendous positive impact on the region. It resulted in the growth of bilateral trade between Israel and UAE, for example, in the growth of cultural and touristic exchanges between countries, indirect flights between countries, and the natural gas sector is not an exception. And it also benefited a lot from the Abraham Accord signing. One of the most prominent examples is the deal of 2021, when the UAE government-controlled investment fund, Mubadala, bought a share in Tamar gas field, which later transformed in 11% share. And Tamar is one of the key fields in Israel. And in 2023, an offer was made by BP and UAE leading gas company ADNOC to acquire 50% of Israeli leading exploration and production player NewMed Energy. So we can see the investment growth, and we can see how Abraham Accords are providing this political stability and prosperity to this region, which desperately needed here in order to make big investments and make big long-term projects and sign long-term gas agreements. So definitely it had a very big impact.
So that's quite interesting, geopolitical and energy dynamics in the region. And especially when you think about Europe and what's going on, in the European Union, how would you see the perspective of the Israeli and Eastern Mediterranean gas demand for the next, let's say, 5, maybe 10 years? Because this situation that you just described in major way is a positive news for the Europeans who try to cut the Russian gas, right?
Yes, I agree with you. So first of all, let's just maybe make a step aside and look at what happened in Europe for the past, let's say 2 years. So Russia was a key supplier to Europe, and at record levels, Russian pipelines gas flows to Europe were reaching 200 BCM per year, which was roughly equivalent to more than 1/3 of total Europe's gas consumption. And since the beginning of 2022, these flows have been reducing, and it is expected that these flows would reduce by about 120 BCM if we compare the pre-crisis level of year 2021 to the results of 2023. So just in 2 years time frame, Russian pipeline flows to Europe can decrease by around 120 BCM. It's an enormous amount because global natural gas consumption is 4 TCM per year. So 4 trillion cubic meters, 4,000 BCM per year. But you need to understand that not all the gas is traded, and the bulk of global gas production is consumed locally. Well, for example, in the United States, you produce gas and you produce it and you consume it locally. And if we take a look at the international gas trade, it is something about 1.2, 1.3 TCM per year, 1.2, 1.3 trillion cubic meters per year. So remembering that figure of 120 BCM of flows decrease from Russia to Europe, and remembering the figure of global gas trade, we see that it represents about 10% of global gas trade. And this 10% of global gas trade was simply removed from the market, and the market became very disbalanced, and it created a chaos in natural gas market. And not only Europe suffered from this situation, it was a domino effect because Europe needed to import more LNG, and that meant that less LNG was available for, let's say, developing nations like Bangladesh, Pakistan, and prices skyrocketed, and these countries simply couldn't afford buy such expensive gas. So it's a very fundamental shift in global gas trade. And if now we go to the East Med region, I see 3 consequences for the East Med gas region. I mean, how the situation on the European gas market, namely the Russian gas flow decrease, impacted East Med gas market. There is a short-term consequence. The first one, in year 2022, prices skyrocketed, and it incentivized producers to produce at the peak capacity and export as much gas as they could. So in year 2022, we saw record supplies from Egypt to Europe, record supplies of Egyptian LNG to Europe. Now, remembering that Egypt imports gas from Israel, this LNG export would not have been possible without Israeli gas flows to Egypt. So you see how the markets are interconnected, and the higher pull for LNG from Europe incentivized gas production in Israel, gas exports from Egypt. So that is a rather short-term consequence. But if we look at the long-term consequences, there are 2 of them. First of all, the global gas market still needs this missing volume. They cannot be created out of thin air, and gas fields are not developed in one day. So now East Med gas reserves have gained such a big attention from international gas players because Europe and global gas market needs these volumes in the long term. And the third consequence, which is also a long-term consequence, that there in year 2022 and even now, there is a strong rebound in interest from the buyers to signing new long-term agreements, even from the European buyers, because previously European buyers were thinking that there is a spot liquid market and gas can be sourced from there. and they were not very happy about signing a long-term agreement. Now the situation has changed. We can give example, for example, of European company named CEFE, which recently has signed long-term offtake agreements with US LNG producers and with Oman. So we see that there is a stronger demand for long-term contracts, and that means that EastMed gas reserves can be monetized using these long-term agreements with European buyers, and long-term agreements are crucial to develop the project, because natural gas is not produced until it's sold. When you have a long-term agreement signed, you have financement secured, and you can take the FID. So actually, there are tremendous changes going there.
And just follow-up question, Alexander. When you speak about those volumes, is it realistically possible to deliver those volumes to Europe? Because, you need LNG carrier to take it from point A to point B. So even if I sign the contract with, I don't know, Egypt, Jordan, or I don't know, whatever country, I mean, are there enough ships to do it? Because it's tremendous amount of gas,
Yes, you're absolutely right. So, but I don't think that the shipping is the key bottleneck, because shipping industry is quite well developed. However, your question is very precise, and of course, it's naive to think that Israeli fields combined with Egypt gas production and maybe with Cyprus could fill the gap of this 120 BCM missing. So if we take a look, for example, at the year 2022, Egypt delivered to Europe about 7 BCM of LNG. If we compare it with the overall European LNG imports, which reached about 170 BCM in year 2022, we see that it's not a big part, but still it's quite an important part. So it's not possible to fill this gap using one supply source. So Europe now is accumulating gas supply source from Africa, also additional gas production in Norway, of course, the United States, which are growing exporters, but it's more or less combining many supply sources together to get the result to fill this gap. And EastMed gas can play a significant role in that process.
We mentioned Cyprus, and you also mentioned Cyprus more times. And one of the sort of like weird question, why they not developing the gas? Like, are there any like technical problems, or is more about the politics? Because you mentioned that Cyprus has significant reserves, so now is the time to dig in and extract it.
To develop natural gas reserves, it's not enough to have just the will to do that. And you've mentioned the political problems, and there are some. Well, first of all, the status of Cyprus being divided, and there are some maritime zones, offshore zones, claims from countries in the region, and that natural gas resources exploration. That is the political issue. If we take a look at the second aspect of the problem, which is the economical and technical feasibility development of this field, we will discover that until now it's still unclear how the Cyprus gas reserves should be developed. There are several options. You can build an LNG plant onshore Cyprus, which is a very expensive solution. You can try to tie Cyprus offshore fields to Egyptian LNG facilities, for example, by building a very long offshore pipeline to those facilities. You can also try to develop Cyprus gas reserves together with Israeli gas reserves. And the other option on the table is, for example, building the so-called EastMed gas pipeline, which could gather gas from Israel offshore fields and Cyprus and deliver it together to Europe. But these all are very complicated projects, and they require the participation of global leading oil and gas exploration companies such as Chevron, Exxon, Eni, because only these companies actually have the experience and the financial ability to deliver such projects. And there have been some interesting developments recently regarding, for instance, the Aphrodite field development. There was a drilling well, there was a exploration well drilled recently by the field operators, and now they wait to analyze the results of this drilling to understand what are the reserves to be developed precisely, and they have filed, the Aphrodite field operators have filed a field development plan to Cyprus government. So there is a process there, and I think that we can expect some news from that side soon.
Just a quick question from my students. When you discover gas offshore, and you know that gas is there, how long does it take to have the first, let's say, cubic meter salt? That process, because many students, because many students, they have like a perception like, oh, there is a gas, they can do it, so next month we can export it, But I think it's not that easy. So realistically, when those countries, they have those reserves, and there are many geopolitical problems, maybe technical problems, I'm asking from the technical, realistic point of view, how long does it take from discovery to export?
Well, I would say that on average, at least 5 years in a successful case, because it's a whole process. Because first, when you understand that there are reserves, then you need to drill an exploration well, then you need to drill an appraisal well, which will confirm the reserves. Then you have to do a lot of work with local regulators, with government, and understand the field development plan. And of course, you need to build infrastructure. You need to build platform to process the gas, because the gas which lies under the seabed, it's not pure methane. Sometimes there is some CO2 there, which should be extracted. Sometimes there is some, I don't know, for example, some other gases that need to be extracted. So you need to have gas processing platform. Sometimes there is a condensate there, which you also have to separate. So
that's quite good to know. And when we speak about East Mediterranean, one of the biggest players is Turkey. So we know Turkey is in a very interesting situation, because on one hand, Turkey is connected to Russia by the pipeline for the natural gas. Then there is Azerbaijan that wants to export natural gas to Europe through Turkey. And then we have the Eastern Mediterranean natural gas situation. So how do you describe the role of Turkey, and what Turkey can realistically get out of these East Mediterranean gas reserves?
Sure. So one of the options for monetization of Israeli offshore gas reserves, namely the reserves of Leviathan field, is to build an offshore pipeline to Turkey. As you've mentioned, Turkey is quite an interesting gas market because it also offers the transit opportunities of natural gas to Europe. And these opportunities are fully utilized by Azerbaijan, which sends gas through Turkey to the top Trans-Adriatic pipeline. And finally, this gas reaches Italy. So one of the options is to connect Israeli gas reserves to Turkey, and some of these volumes might be consumed within Turkey. Some of these volumes can be sent to Europe. So it is one of the options. But if we speak about the recent developments, we see that Turkey imports some of LNG from Egypt because Turkey also has very developed LNG import infrastructure besides Russia, Azerbaijan, and Iran. So in a way, Turkey is already benefiting from ISMED natural gas reserves exploration. The thing we need to understand about Turkey is that Turkey in 2023 launched its own field called Sakarya. It is located in the Black Sea offshore, and according to Turkey official estimates, which were published recently and claimed by, I think that by Turkish President Erdogan, this field might contain up to 700 BCM, which is quite a big amount. Of course, this field would not be able to fully satisfy Turkish domestic gas demand. So Turkey will still need to import gas. It is projected that this field could give up to 15 BCM of gas per year, which is roughly 1/4 of Turkish natural gas consumption per year. So there is an interesting development going on there. And the last but very important point I would like to mention about Turkey is that Turkey wants to become a gas hub and accumulate gas from different sources and to provide it to European buyers. And I think that Turkey might be very interested in building a pipeline to import Israeli gas because it will boost the Turkey gas market liquidity, and the liquidity is the key success factor for any gas hub. So I think Turkey might be quite interested in this project.
And at the moment, what connects Turkey and Israel in terms of energy? Is there any pipeline or anything, or how is it?
No. Currently,
no. Okay.
Turkey is not connected via any pipeline infrastructure to Israel.
So the pipeline would basically benefit. It's like mutual beneficial, like for Turkey and Israel, because you don't need the LNG carriers and you can go straight via the pipeline. Right.
Yeah.
And are there any projects that want to build it, like on the table, or just in the theoretical level at the moment?
There were some negotiations, as far as I know, but I don't think that there is a precise project which is lying on the table right now.
Yeah, because I also heard something about Gazprom people, going around the issue. So because when you have pipeline, it's Gazprom bread and butter. So that's quite interesting from the geopolitical point of view. But let's move to Egypt, because Egypt, not many people know generally. It's quite populated country, and when internal consumption of natural gas is increasing, then naturally is less to export. How do you understand this situation in terms of the future? Do you have any demographic reports that you can connect to the energy export potentially to Europe or elsewhere?
So do you mean is there the correlation between the Egypt's demographic situation and its gas export potential? It's a very interesting question because, as you've mentioned, indeed, especially during hot summer months, when the gas consumption in Egypt spikes because there are very strong demands for air conditioning in the country, exports of LNG decrease, and we can see it even now. So now Egypt doesn't export any LNG, and country's energy minister claimed that Egypt might resume LNG exports only in October, when the hot months are over. So basically, this very strong demand from local markets results in a very strong demand for Israeli supplies also, which I'm sure that this supplies volumes will grow this year to 2022. And Egypt is a very big potential market for new supplies also coming from Israel. And the other thing we need to understand about Egypt, that it has large gas production, but its gas production come mainly from the fields that have been developed recently, and many of these fields, they now are facing depletion, and their depletion rates are quite high. And Egypt tries to attract as many international energy players to invest in its gas production, and it incentivizes companies to drill and drill more. But many experts question the ability of Egypt to maintain this gas production at current level, and given the demographic situation and the consumption growth, we might see Egypt becoming net gas importer in some time period again.
So from what you're saying, many links are heading to Israel as might be the future natural gas exporter. So let's speak a little bit about Israel and what is Israel doing so this position in geopolitics and energy can be realistic in the future. And can we start with the little description where the Israel is at the moment when we have the global LNG or natural gas buyers? Yeah. So I want to know what's the significance of the Israel at the moment and what it can be when we consider all the technical things that you were mentioning during the interview, because I think that's quite interesting to dig in.
Sure. So as I've mentioned earlier, Israel has went through the process of so-called natural gas revolution with the launch of Tamar field and Leviathan field at the very end of 2019. Israel gas production has significantly increased, and in 2022 it amounted to 22 BCM, and the production will further rise. There are new fields being launched, Israeli offshore, for example, Karish field, which is operated by a company named Energean, and we might see in the upcoming future Israeli producing around 30 BCM per year. So currently, Israel doesn't export any LNG. There are long-term agreements between Israeli companies and Jordanian company named NEPCO, which is a power generation company, for about 3 BCM per year of supplies. And there is also a long-term agreement signed between Tamar and Leviathan field from Israeli side and Egyptian buyer from the other side, which is a long-term agreement. So currently, Israel exports only pipeline to Egypt. But as we know that Egypt's margin between gas production and gas consumption is very thin, and in fact, without Israeli supplies, Egypt, for example, wouldn't have been able to supply those LNG volumes to Europe in 2022. So we cannot say 100% sure that this exactly Israeli molecules were liquefied in Egypt and sent using LNG carriers to Europe. But from the data, we can see that without Israeli supplies, it would not be possible. Now, speaking about how the gas is delivered from Israel to Egypt, there is a pipeline called EMG, which long time ago was used to transport Egypt gas to Israel. Now it is used in so-called reverse mode. And there is another transport route via Jordan, actually, via the so-called Arab gas pipeline. So the gas transits Jordan and reaches Egypt from the south, from the side of the Red Sea. So these are two export routes. But we know that the EMG pipeline capacity is being increased. There is a project of construction additional section that will increase the EMG capacity from current about 5 BCM per year to 7.5 BCM per year, which will enable new supply volumes from Israel. And also the so-called Jordanian route could also be increased. So what we see now that there is an ongoing process of the increase in capacity from Israel to Egypt. And there is also a project of building a new pipeline called Nitzana pipeline. And given all these projects together, in the long term, we can see that Israeli export pipeline capacity to Egypt will double, which will enable more flows. So now the question is how Israeli gas producers would monetize these reserves, for example, Leviathan field. There are many options on the table. The first option is to build an independent floating LNG plant. It's quite a complicated and challenging solution, but in the world, there are many examples of such FLNG facilities. And one of them was recently developed by Italian ENI in Mozambique. There are FLNG plants in Malaysia, in Australia, and it's a solution. And Leviathan Field Partners are now conducting a pre-FEED study to understand the feasibility and technical aspects of this project. So it is one expert option. The second expert option, as we've mentioned, is to build an offshore pipeline to Turkey and to send Leviathan gas there. The third option, which is still on the table, is to build an EastMed pipeline that will connect Israeli offshore fields to the European market directly via Cyprus. And of course, there are also options of additional supplies to Egypt. And maybe there could be some kind of agreement which would allow Israeli gas producers to use Egyptian LNG plants, because Egyptian LNG plants are there, but much time they stay idle because of gas deficit.
Right. And what about the security of the Israelis' natural gas fields offshores? I mean, are there any disputes, or do you have any problems that need, some sort of political or technical solution? Because from the energy security, one thing is that you have the gas, second, that you have ability to extract it, but once you have some disputes, that complicates the whole matter. So how is that?
Regarding some complicated issues with the Israeli offshore fields, there is one issue that I would like to mention that the Aphrodite field, which is a Cyprus offshore field, actually lies close to the border between Israel and Cyprus, and there's a very small piece of this natural gas formation, which is called Ishai field, which is the Israeli gas field. So it's an interesting topic because in order to monetize Aphrodite gas reserves, Cyprus government and Israeli government certainly need to act together. Yeah, so this is one example of such an issue with Aphrodite field. You're absolutely right that when there is a maritime dispute, it makes things much difficult. But another positive example is Israeli-Lebanon maritime agreement, which was reached in 2022 and brokered by the United States. And it also provided political stability in this maritime zone, and it enabled Lebanon to launch its drilling campaign of this called Kana field, and an international consortium led by Total, with the participation of ENI and Qatargas, are working there now. So it's a positive dynamic. And here are just brief examples of how interaction between governments is needed to enhance political stability and to enable the field's development. So, but I don't see any other significant issues with Israeli offshore fields development.
Mm-hmm. And from those other countries, is there any significant dispute issue, or basically everything is sorted plus minus?
There is a dispute around Cyprus offshore zone,
okay,
which is well studied and which is well known. Yes, but regarding Egypt and Israel and Cyprus, no. I think that the relations between the states are on the rise, and even Israel and Lebanon, they reached an agreement. So I think that there were made significant steps in terms of enhancement of this maritime stability in the region.
Alexander, you mentioned international actors, many players. So can we go a bit further and mention which major companies or governments or countries or maybe some international other players are involved in this Eastern Mediterranean gas? So we will have a perspective how international is this natural gas sector or field. And then the second question, when you are speaking about those discoveries of the fields, is this done by the governments? Like, for instance, Israel has Israeli companies doing this, or is this discovery matter is also performed by the international actors?
Thanks for the question. So if we speak about international majors which are present in this map, it is easier to mention which majors are not present here than to mention which, because nearly all big international players here. Chevron is the operator of the Leviathan field in Israel, and Chevron is also shareholder in the Aphrodite field in Cyprus. ENI is the key producer in Egypt and the operator of their key field Zohr. BP, Shell, Total, they're all present in the region. And I think that their presence will only grow. So I've already mentioned that BP and ADNOC, UAE's company, made an offer to acquire 50% of NewMed Energy. And NewMed is a shareholder in Leviathan field. So the international majors are increasing their presence in the region. And you've mentioned the process of how the fields are being discovered. So basically, if we simplify it, the story goes like, first of all, the government launches the so-called bidding round, which was the recent case of Israel, which held its fourth offshore bidding round this year. We don't know the results yet, but through this bidding round, Israel attracts bids from international companies or consortium of local companies and international companies that want to develop and further explore the offshore reserves. And when the bid was closed, so all the bids were assembled, Israeli ministry claimed that now Israel is country of milk, honey, and natural gas. So the results of the bidding round, should be quite successful, and there may be newcomers to Israeli offshore. So usually it is a consortium, it is a JV between, it could be two or one international player and local Israeli gas producer, which need to drill an exploration well and which have a certain obligations under this bidding round. So they ask the government to allow them to drill and to perform the drilling program. And if the drilling is successful and the reserves are there, then they commit a field development plan, take FID, and the field is developed. So basically that's how it works.
I think many students will be interested in, are there any Russian companies involved in that projects or not really?
So to my knowledge, Russian company Rosneft is the shareholder of the Zohr field in Egypt, which is along with Leviathan, which is the key field in the region. So Rosneft is present in Egypt, and Russian independent gas company Novatek had been present offshore Lebanon, but according to latest news, they left the Lebanon offshore blocks. So as far as I know, this is the only presence of Russian companies in the region. Well, of course, besides Turkey, because Turkey has very strong ties with Gazprom and with Russia, but Turkey stands a little bit aside.
The last question for today's interview, and we can't skip it, is the European Union Green Deal. What's your perspective of European Union building gas pipelines if on one hand the European Union is like pushing to Green Deal, and on the other hand European Union is in many ways still dependent on the fossil fuels? So I think that would be good explanation for the international audience and students. How is your perspective as a technical person, as an analytic of the gas market?
Sure. So I think that firstly, European Green Deal is not against natural gas. And there were some decisions made in Europe which named natural gas, together with nuclear, by the way, the green energy supply source. For example, to build a new natural gas power station in Europe, it is possible even now. You just need to meet certain requirements in terms of emissions, but you need to understand that Green Deal is not prohibiting natural gas. That's the first point. The second point is that Green Deal pays a very big attention to the so-called low carbon gases, including hydrogen. And as we know, hydrogen can be produced from natural gas, as it's so-called blue hydrogen. So there is a very big potential of utilization of natural gas to produce hydrogen and to provide this clean source of energy to Europe. So there is still room for gas to grow even within European Green Deal. And now the third point regarding pipelines, definitely now the long-term infrastructure, big infrastructure pipelines projects are not as easy as they used to be maybe 10 years ago. But still, if we take a look at the European natural gas landscape, we can see that new pipelines are built here and there, with Baltic Pipe, which links Denmark, which links Norway, Denmark, and Poland, launched recently. Interconnectors are built here and there between Bulgaria and Greece. So, and we've mentioned Azerbaijan that ships natural gas through Turkey to Europe, and they are doing it through the TANAP and TAP pipeline. And there is a project of expansion of TAP pipeline to Europe. So I wouldn't say that it's a no to pipelines. I would say that it's a new era for pipelines. Maybe these pipelines should be fitted, for example, to potential transportation of hydrogen in the future, or hydrogen methane mixture, which is also a solution. So it's a new era, but I wouldn't say that it's a complete no for pipelines.
Alexander, thank you very much for your insightful words and remarks about the Eastern Mediterranean natural gas. I think it's a fascinating topic to research, and there are so many geopolitical, technical, international trade issues that researchers can cover. So again, thank you very much for this insightful interview, because it's like very comprehensive. We have all the information coming from you in one place to rediscover and further research. So I wish you good luck with your research, articles, publications, and I wish you also a lot of energy for your research, because it's a complicated story, it's a complicated issue as well. Thank you again for being on IR Thinker.